speaking with Alexandra, and today's conversation is about birth, but doesn't involve her birth stories. We have a very compelling conversation about the work that Alexandra does in the world. We touch on how Alexandra is a mother first and a social scientist who has been doing her research on home birth mothers and traditional midwifery and its indigenous roots within Hawaii. Alexandra is also a published author and has just recently finished her book, Back to the Womb, Reclaiming Birth Sovereignty, which is available for purchase and linked within the show notes. She talks about her journey into doula work after having her first baby and what it was like giving her support to a mother birthing within the hospital system a few months after having her own home birth experience. We get into how Alexandra chose her topic for dissertation, speaking about home birth mothers and traditional midwifery and why these women made the choices that they did. We touch upon how indigenous Hawaiian women have been systematically disconnected from their indigenous roots. Alexandra speaks to the layers of trauma that indigenous Hawaiian women face while birthing within hospitals and some of the ways the indigenous midwives are trying to uphold their birthing traditions. And we briefly touch on the importance of men in the birth space. This is such an interesting and eye-opening conversation that I'm so grateful to be sharing in this space. And if you're a woman who practices birth work in a traditional way and would love to share your stories and uphold your traditions, please feel free to reach out to me. And be sure to find Alexandra on Instagram at Alexandra Kisitu. Women, have you heard? The Free Birthing in Color movement now has a private community space for all women to join. Within this private community, we have monthly village prenatals to celebrate and support the pregnant women moving towards their birthing time. There are monthly community calls to build deeper connection with one another. We have bi-monthly book clubs to gain deeper wisdom of our female bodies. There are guest speakers that will facilitate talks on all things women's health. We have space for mothers to share their in-power birth stories and so much more. You can join this community space for only $6 per month from now until December 21st of this year. I know that you've been seeking connection, support, guidance, knowledge, and newfound friendships. So now is the time to join us and find exactly what you're looking for. Even if you don't identify as a woman of color or an indigenous woman, you're welcome to be here because we all need to be witnessed in the passages of life that we move through, no matter who we are or what we look like. This community will hold you whether you're pregnant or not pregnant, trying to conceive, don't want children at all, if you've had losses or abortions, if you're a birth or death worker of any kind, a grandmother, an auntie, or wise woman, there's space for you to be seen and share your wisdom to the collective well. Go to primalwomenportal.com/FBC community or check the show notes to become a member today. Hello, Alexandra, and welcome to the Free Birthing in Color movement. I am very excited to have you here because I know that you have lots of beautiful information to share, and we have been trying to connect since late last year, and now we're finally having this chat, and I'm just so excited to welcome you into this space today.
Thank you so much for having me, Karma. I'm very honored to be in this space, and I'm just grateful for you and all the work that you do.
Oh, thank you.
Mhm.
So before we get into the big long talk of all that we have going, I would love to ask you 3 questions. And the first of the 3 is, what is your ancestry and lineage that you carry within your body?
Sure. Wow, this is a great question, right?
Mm,
Because my mind wants to go back to like the first mothers or first
mm,
mother. But so I think we're all kind of a mix of all of that energy in its own
mm,
way. Um, but I guess I would identify myself primarily as Lebanese and Irish.
mm,
I'm sure there's some other things sprinkled in there. I
mhm,
know that my great grandfather came from Lebanon and was a really successful journalist in Beirut and had to leave for whatever reason, had to escape
mhm,
persecution. So he came
mhm.
to the States.
Okay.
And my father's side is mostly from Ireland. So they have, their whole story of kind of bad relations with the British.
Mm-hmm.
So I think primarily they came here due to the famine and to seek better opportunities and
Right.
feed their children.
Yeah.
And then somewhere along the way, my maternal grandmother, her family lineage settled in Maine and had connections with the Native um, Americans in Maine, the Penobscot um, nation, and so people intermingled, and so we have a little bit of that sprinkled in our
Mm-hmm.
DNA as well. So that's as far as I know. I haven't done a 23andMe, so
Okay.
it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of hard to track because we have to rely on the truth of these stories sometimes of where
Totally.
people are coming from. But I know for sure there's Irish in there and Lebanese and Native. So
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, it's so interesting that you even know that much. Some people don't even know further than the mainland of North America that they grew up on or anything like that. So yeah, just being able to say the Lebanese in there, the Irish in there, and the Native American is really, really potent. And I think it's also really powerful as well to speak
yeah.
that. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think my family lineage is relatively new to the States. I don't think there
Mm,
was anyone here like I don't suspect there was anyone here in the 1700s or even the
mm,
early 1800s. So
hmm.
we're still kind of a new
Yeah.
group of people here in the
Yeah.
States. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Amazing. So for question number two, now we're getting into what it is that you do. So what work is it that you do for the Feminine Collective?
Oh, wow, this is such a good question. Well, I would say first and foremost, I'm a mother.
Hmm.
So, and I'm still navigating what that means every single day.
Hmm.
My kids are 7 and 9, and I gave birth to them outside of a hospital setting. So
Hmm.
I think that's really shaped my own approach to other women and how I support other women, and just
Hmm.
trying to push back on maybe like prescribed ideas of how we should live and how we should be.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so I think supporting that, like reminding women like it's okay to rest a little more on your period.
Hmm.
And I try to remind myself of that. I'm not always
Yeah.
not always perfect. And then I after my daughter was born, I did a doula training, and then kind of decided when that organization got more codified that I really wasn't about that life. Like I don't really love to align myself with organizations that continuously have you jump through hoops to prove yourself rather than like your work coming from like a heart-centered like um place, I guess. And I know in Hawaii a lot of the work that I've done also has been trying to support the midwives in their fight for or against the state of Hawaii to be licensed, because there are folks
Hmm.
that don't want to be licensed there and don't
Yeah.
want to jump through hoops to prove to some state apparatus that they can do the work they're meant to do in the world.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so yeah, and then I'm a trained social scientist. I have a PhD in sociology, and
Wow.
so yeah, so a lot of my work in the past decade has really been writing a lot and doing research
Hmm.
on home birth moms and
Hmm.
midwifery specifically in Hawaii.
Hmm. Wow, that's so amazing. Yeah. That's incredible having a PhD. And you said it was in social
Soci
economics?
Sociology. Yeah.
Sociology, pardon,
Mhm.
sociology. So wow, I can only imagine how much reading and writing and knows in the book that you had to have just to get to where you are. And that's also another reason why I'm so excited to continue on this conversation with you, because of all of the beautiful things that you mentioned with doing work in Hawaii and things like that, and what we'll get into. So I'll just ask you this, and then we can lead into that beautiful story. What is it that got you into doing this work, your heart's work, your sacred work?
I think maybe this is not true for everybody, but for me, um, I think it was more of like I can't see myself doing anything else. And that's not to say like I don't do other things to make money.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have to have to survive
Mm-hmm.
and pay for bills and food and things like that. But the work that or the energy that I've put into this work, it's kind of like I didn't really have a choice. Like it was just very natural. So after I gave birth to my daughter, I was like, oh, of course I'm gonna do doula work. I just love being in the birth realm, and I love the
Mm-hmm.
support that I got from the midwives that cared for me, and I love this time for women.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, I was 26 when I had her, and we don't teach young women in the US very well about how to navigate pregnancy and
Mm-hmm.
postpartum and labor from like um a spiritual lens or a spiritual approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really spiritual birth for her, and I was like, dang, like I'm missing out on this whole world. I have to be in this
Mm-hmm.
world, and there's really no
Mm-hmm.
other choice.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I hear that from a lot of women that have their birth experiences, whether it was a really beautiful one, as you're explaining about your birth with your daughter, or perhaps it was one that had a bit more trauma in it, but just that experience of birth, stepping into that motherhood realm, turn something on in women where they want to be able to provide that support, provide that witnessing in whatever capacity it is where they're at in their life. And I just believe that that is like it is our innate programming as women. Like we want to be there for other women. We want to be witness to other women claiming their power, or we want to be um there for women because we have such big open hearts, women that do support in the hospital system and see all of the violence and the trauma and the abuse that does happen. Like they go into those settings because they do want to see something different. They want to, we want to protect our mothers. We want to protect these babies. And it is just such that innate pull that we have within our hearts to like gather as women, be with women, support these women. So it's
Mhm.
not surprising to hear you say that after you had your birth experience. And it's so true. Like young women and girls only hear about pregnancy is if you get pregnant, you're going to ruin your life,
Yeah.
like you're all of these bad things are going to happen. And granted, like very young girls that are still in high school should not be having sex and getting pregnant and trying to navigate this motherhood journey as they are so young, but they do need to know that pregnancy, like if they had that ideal that pregnancy is a beautiful spiritual transformative process that they could be going through,
Mhm.
I'm sure a lot of young women would, in my opinion, and like I'm just, it might not be true, but I think this would maybe not abstain from sex, but know that like, okay, I want to have this beautiful birthing experience. So maybe I'm not going to have sex with my boyfriend when he's trying to pressure me into it because I don't want to get pregnant with him and have his
Mhm.
baby. It's like that narrative would change a lot of different things. Um,
Mhm.
but I'm getting off on a tangent and talking about something
No, I
a
totally
little
agree
more.
with you.
But it's
Well,
it's
and
so
I
powerful.
agree with you. Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
I think the dominant culture has really desensitized us from the spirituality of sex, and not saying that sex
Mm-hmm.
always has to be spiritual. Like there are
Mm-hmm.
occasions when it's just not, and
Yeah.
like that's okay too.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we've gotten so far away from the spirituality of sex because it's been so muddled with
Mm-hmm.
like Puritan values, and so
Yeah.
it's like abstinence only, and
Mm-hmm.
these kind of shame cycles of it happening. So we don't see like how beautiful it can be because there's so much shame and
Mm.
judgment wrapped up in all of it.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to ask you, so when you were doing this journey into doula work and supporting women, what was that like for you, especially after having such a beautiful birth experience with your first daughter? What type of
Mhm.
births were you supporting, and how is that energy kind of coming into you as you were witnessing this?
So my first baby I witnessed being born after I completed the doula training was actually a hospital birth,
Mm.
and that was the first time I had been to a hospital birth ever. So it was new territory for me, and
Mhm.
coming into it knowing, having had just my daughter a couple months earlier and had her at a freestanding birth center, literally just in a bedroom with a tub. Being in the hospital was certainly different. And the birthing mama and her sister were there, and then my doula trainer and I was there. And it was just like we had this little bubble of good energy, and her sister was an amazing doula to her too, and we were
Mhm.
doing all these things to help her with the pain. And this was her third baby. She had had two vaginal births previously in the hospital, and this was her third one. And I just remember when the OB would come in to check on her, which was few and far between, would kind of be like, okay, well, if you're not progressing faster, we're going to give you Pitocin. Bye. And how that kind of just disrupted our little bubble that we created around her, and how,
Mhm.
like, she was really great about not letting that mess with her, maybe because it was her third baby.
Mhm.
But it kind of messed with me in a sense where I was just like, she's doing fine. Like, why are you coming in here and telling her that she needs to progress faster? Like, it wasn't like she
Mhm.
was stalled at a 4 for 12 hours or anything.
Mhm.
She was making progress, and she was making progress relatively quickly in terms of, hospital timelines. But
Mhm.
um, that was probably the part where I was like, oh, yeah, I see why, I made the choice that I did, because I didn't want to be pressured in this way.
Mhm.
The mom ended up having the baby. She was really quiet. She had a very quiet birth, which was
Mhm.
really different from mine, because I was like, and I've always been really loud and vocal in my births, and I think that's the
Yeah.
primal roars come out for me, and this
Yeah.
mom was not a primal roarer, so I was like, okay, she's amazing. but but it was probably the most gentle birth I could imagine in the hospital, and the least violent in that way. The nurses were
Okay.
really nice, and she ended up giving birth vaginally, and was, skin to skin right away and all of that. And baby did great.
Mhm.
Mom did great. But I just remember that disruption that really bothered me,
Mhm.
because the OB was looking, again, it's their lens. They're looking at it from a very clinical perspective, and
Mhm.
like very measured, instead of looking at birth as a spiritual kind of thing. So
Yeah.
so the next birth I did after that was a home birth, because I was like, I don't want to do home birth
Mhm.
again. I want to be, doing a home birth. That was in Hawaii. I supported one of my really good friends, and Hawaii is very hilly, as you can imagine. It's very
Mhm.
mountainous, probably like Costa Rica. And one of my favorite parts of her labor was, I was like, let's go outside and walk a little bit, because she had like the steepest driveway, and then it was down like this really big hill.
Mhm.
And we were walking around, and she's like, okay, I need to get back inside, because she was doing all these lunges and feeling really
Mhm.
wide. And I was like, yes, these hills really work.
Mhm.
But I think she was probably mad at me in that moment, because she
Oh,
was like,
she
why?
was walking the hills.
Yeah, she was walking the hills, and because I was like,
Okay.
let's go outside and walk some hills, and we'll get, are you ready to get things moving? And she's like, yeah, I really, been in early labor all day. And I'm like, okay, it's nighttime, let's go walk some hills.
Mhm.
And I just remember her like feeling her energy open up, and the moon and the stars are so magical there, and like
Mhm.
looking up at the moon and the stars, and then this mama who's birthing, and it was just, I was just so grateful to be there. Um, so yeah, yeah. Then that kind of just, again, there was really no other choice but to, if I was going to do a PhD program, which I was,
Mhm.
I had to center it around birth.
Okay. Yeah. So then, yeah, speak to me then about this PhD program, and because I don't know, I've never done one, so I don't know anything about it. Like, how did you yeah, okay. So you were experiencing birth, witnessing birth, and then you're in this PhD program and you have to pick a topic, and so you chose birth. What aspect of birth was it that you wanted to speak to, or like you write a dissertation, is it?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that you wanted
Yeah.
to like make your dissertation on. Like, what was that topic? And then how did that guide you into leading to working with these midwives in Hawaii, and then making your book that you just had published recently as well?
Yeah, so the program that I entered into is a really long program. It takes like a minimum of 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Because it's 3 years of intensive coursework at least, and then you have to go through a whole comprehensive exam to kind of refine what field of sociology you want to do.
Mm.
And then you have to write your dissertation proposal, and then you have to work on your research and get approval to do research, especially if you're doing research on human subjects, which
Mm-hmm.
sounds really weird, like governmental human subjects. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, you have to get approval because universities don't always have the best track record of getting approval from human subjects to do research on them, as
Okay.
you know, as we know.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, so we kind of go through all of that training, and then write the proposal, and then get your participants, which I can talk about a little bit, and
Mm-hmm.
then write your dissertation, and then defend it. So it's kind of a crazy, stressful. I mean, it's a really stressful process. And then alongside that, usually you're teaching courses. So I taught a lot of courses in women's health and
Mm.
indigenous women's health and sociology and women's studies and all of that along the way.
Okay.
Um, but so I started my program in 2015. My daughter was just a year old. And then I got pregnant with my son like the first semester. And I was
Mm.
like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And I considered for a moment that why don't I just do a qualitative research project for my dissertation, because statistical analyses can take less time than interviewing a bunch of people and hearing their stories. So I kind of considered for a moment, maybe I'll just do a study on like whether home birth moms go back to work sooner or
Mm.
not sooner than moms who birth in the hospital. And I kind of thought, well, home birth moms tend to, lean more towards staying at home, not all of them, but staying at home, having a very family centered life and homeschooling their children. So I had some kind of hypotheses about that. And then I was like, you know what? I don't want to do that. I want to
Mm.
hear the stories of the moms who are birthing.
Mm.
So I lean more towards that qualitative research because I want to hear people's stories and I want
Mm.
to hear them from them rather than like, the dominant worldview of home birth moms being
Yeah.
really irresponsible or
Mm-hmm.
super anti-establishment and super uneducated in science and things like these really
Mm-hmm.
silly ideas that our
Yeah.
dominant society has developed about home birth moms. So I was like, you know what, I'm a home birth mom. I had given birth to my son at home with a unlicensed midwife in Hawaii, and I was like, I wanna, and at the time I was hanging out with a lot of home birth moms,
Mm-hmm.
kind of meet them at the health food stores or in dance groups, and
Mm.
or supporting local artisans. And I I was just like, well, I'm around all these people anyway, and they're all my friends, so I might as
Mm-hmm.
well share their stories. So
Yeah.
so that's kind of how I got on the topic. But in the field of sociology, I had to figure out like, what is my research question here? What do
Mm-hmm.
I want to know? And it had
Mm-hmm.
to relate to sociology somehow. So I decided, you know what, I want to look at their lifestyles and their worldviews,
Mm.
because it seems like they all have pretty similar worldviews, and it's nuanced, but it seems like this is a collective of women that really share a lot of similar values.
Okay.
And I want to express what those values are and write about them and write about their stories so that people aren't feeling so weird about home birth moms or having weird stigmas, so that people
Mm-hmm.
can actually understand who we are.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think that's really important because if we want to empower all women
Mm-hmm.
and the feminine collective, we we need to share stories of all women, right? Like
Yeah.
we need to share stories of the feminine.
Yeah, and like you said, change that narrative because a lot of people, say that home birth moms are crunchy and
Mhm.
they're birthing their babies at home because they don't care about their children or, whatever these weird little anecdotes that people say about women that are making the choice to birth at home and women that are doing this for the most part whether they're birthing with a medical provider, and especially for the women that are choosing to birth free of any medical system or having any medical provider with them. They're the ones that are actually doing the most research if they're looking into it. They're the ones that are trusting in themselves the most to make the best decision for their child to have the safest possible birth experience. So
Mhm.
it's just so sad that it's such um a flipped like what's the word I'm looking for?
Like the narrative, right?
Yeah,
Like
like a
the
flipped narrative and
idea.
just yeah, like how we see or I mean now it is getting a lot better because more people are choosing this more
Mhm.
life living closer to the land and closer to their bodies and things like that. But yeah, I totally understand how you said you started this in 2015, like that
Mhm.
stigma with home birth mothers, yourself included, was probably much different and really just like, oh, people kind of, why would you have your baby at home? What's wrong with you? You have a
Yeah.
hospital to go to. And it's, well, yes, that's an option, but also there's the
Mhm.
beautiful option of safely just having my baby in my own home. And that's
Right.
perfectly all right to do and is just as justified as having a baby in a hospital, even more so
Mhm.
in my
Mhm.
opinion. So yeah, I
Yeah,
love I
I
love that that's your
agree.
topic.
Thank you. Yeah, and
Mm,
I think you really touched on something important about like the view of mothers as selfish when they're literally doing one of probably the most unselfish things they can do is to be like,
mm-hmm,
okay, I'm going to surrender fully into this experience
mm-hmm,
and I'm going to trust. And it's not always free of fear when we go
mm-hmm,
into that,
mm-hmm,
and we're doing piles and piles of research on like, okay, well, what, if I give them the vitamin K shot, what are the risks, what are the benefits, if I,
mm,
if I don't do this, if I delay cord cutting, what are the risks, and I mean, there's so much information that we gather along the way.
mm-hmm,
And I think like from a spiritual perspective, how this plays out in society, it's like anytime that you take on your own sovereignty and your own authority about how you're going to live your life, because home birth extends to everything out.
mm-hmm,
I mean, it's just a ripple effect for the rest of your life, even
mm-hmm,
if you're 90 years old.
mm-hmm.
And the moment that we take that responsibility, um, it's a dangerous thing for the systems
Oh yeah.
because it's like, who are you to say you
Mm-hmm,
don't need us?
mm-hmm,
We're gonna call you X, Y, and Z, so everybody hates you because we want them insecure. We want them relying on our systems. We want them scared to even contemplate whether they can have their own sovereignty or not.
exactly. And then who are you to think that you're going to get out of the machine that we have created for you? You're not going to make us money. You want to make yourself money and try and live a happy life, right? It's just,
Right.
yeah, it is the dangerous thing to stand up for yourself and say, I'm going to make my own decisions, live my life the way I want to, and birth
Mhm.
my babies the way that I want to, because I don't need to be connected to this system that's just for death culture. I want to live a thriving,
Right.
happy, joyful life.
Mhm.
And yeah, it totally just like the system labels people. That's why it's like the crunchy
Mhm.
mom or the weird people that want to live off grid. It's like, why would they do
Yeah.
that? It's like, well, it's kind of cool to live close to
Yeah.
nature, right? It's awesome. It
Yeah.
feels just so much more easy breezy and like just vibing in such a beautiful way. So
Yeah.
yeah, and that's like a whole
Really, it
other, that could be
does.
a whole other podcast episode. Taking
Right?
your freedom and power back, just yeah, because we can. That's what our birthright is to be able to live in our
Yeah.
freedom. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But then you see the women who are historically have fought back against colonization or adapting to American ways of living or dominant cultures, and you see them being racialized or them being put into a socioeconomic lens. You see that play out in the hospital, and you see it play out from home birth moms. If they have to have a transfer, you can see the faces of the moms who come in and they're retaliated against because in some way, shape, or form, they're viewed as that fight against the systems, and it makes people feel really uneasy. So the backlash is that we have all this obstetric violence, particularly among or against Black women and indigenous women, and that has certainly played out in my research as far as the moms who maybe had given, not all of them, but some of them had given birth in the hospital, and they were like, they basically like, and trigger word, but basically raped me because I didn't give consent for them to go inside of my vagina, and they did. And they felt so violated or screamed at or given episiotomies against their will, and then they're like, never again. They won't take the risk of being treated like that. So then they find a midwife, and they get the love and spirit from a midwife, and they get to heal a lot of the previous birth traumas. Not that ever goes away fully, but those second, third births outside the hospital have been really healing for a lot of women, especially Hawaiian women too, who have they're in such a interesting dynamic with the state and the medical authority, which has taken away so much of their own healing connections with the land and the plant medicine and their way of healing.
Totally. So do you want to get into that then, as you formed your question for what you wanted to do your dissertation on, and then do you want to kind of get into the kind of stories that you were hearing from women that was shaping what it was that you were going to write about?
Yeah, I kind of went in with kind of an open-ended interview, because I don't really and I feel like you probably feel this way. I don't really like to just be like, this is what we're going to talk about, this is only what we're going to talk about, and you're only going to answer the questions that I ask. I like to have the conversation kind of unfold organically, and take discovery wherever it goes. So if a mom wants to talk about one subject, we do that. If she wants to talk about another element of her home birth, we did that. I did make sure I asked about their lifestyle, about how they view the hospitals, about how they view themselves as a birthing mother. And so I interviewed women of all different backgrounds. So there were local women to Hawaii, there were Hawaiian women, Black women, Black American women rather, and then African women who had moved to Hawaii as well, and then white women as well. And then kind of there's a lot of mix of because of kind of the migration pattern with Hawaii in the plantation days. There are also a lot of mix of like Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, Hawaiian, like again with this, like everybody's kind of mixed with something now. So there's a lot of women who had a lot of different cultural backgrounds too, all rolled into one. So that was kind of just the demographics of who I interviewed. But I would say that they all had something to say about the way women are treated in the hospital, and not just in birth, but in, we're just not taken seriously in the allopathic field. But I'm hoping that's changing. And then they all really led a lifestyle that was centered on the health of their family, but from a holistic perspective. So, not just the absence of disease definition of health, but am I balanced? How's my mental health? How's my emotional health? How's my physical health? And really centering their lifestyles around that holistic health perspective. So every decision was made from there, and every decision was made from a family-centered lifestyle. So a lot of these women probably comparatively led really much slower lives than the average American. So really, you know, going to McDonald's after a 10-hour day at work and sitting in traffic was not the way that they lived their lives. It was, I'm going to work close to home. Maybe I'll homeschool. A lot of them homeschooled their kids. I'm going to try to buy food from the farmers markets or grow my own food. Some of them had farms, so they were able to do that. Some of them, you know, just supported local food producers. And so really getting connected and centered and grounded was really important. And kind of, yeah, it was kind of the crunchy lifestyle, but it wasn't to be fashionable or trendy. It was literally to like, I've done the research on pesticides. I've done the research on what it does to our souls when we're not connected to the earth. I've done the research on physically, how do you live with vitality? Well, you have to connect with the earth to do that. So really, really highly educated women, no matter their letters behind their names, because I kind of, even if I have a PhD, I push back on that because there are people with so much wisdom who have zero letters behind their names. And some of the women, you know, they had advanced education, but some of them didn't, but they were all very wise about how they lived their lifestyles. And I would say they all, maybe not all of them, but the majority of the moms were like, you know, one of the reasons why I birthed, and maybe I didn't know it at the time, but one of the reasons that I birthed is because of this anti-colonial sentiment, whether that was like anti-colonialism in terms of their connection with the state in the hospital, anti-colonial in terms of pushing back on prescribed lifestyles that were against their culture, or anti-colonial over their bodies. Like, I don't want colonization over my female body from, you know, the patriarchy.
Right. Wow.
So that was a lot, sorry. But
no, I loved it. That's so fascinating. And so speaking to their birth stories, then you had women that some of them did birth in hospital, had that experience where they were thinking never again, not happening. And then they spoke to the experiences that they had working with the midwives that are traditional to Hawaii, and how that experience was, as you were saying, healing and obviously much different and much better. So do you want to speak to like some of the similarities that these women were sharing when they were talking about hospital births? You did say like they were violated, and there was like violent trauma and abuse that was happening to them. So then on the flip side to that, when they were working with these lay midwives that have the traditional culture of Hawaii and have the understanding of nature and birth and the sacredness and spiritual aspects of women moving through this transformational portal, what were a lot of those key similarities that were coming up with these different women you were speaking to?
That's a great question. I keep thinking about this mama who lived on the North Shore, but she was talking about that birth in the hospital isn't just traumatic in Hawaii because it's having to go into the hospital. It was also about where the hospital was built and what used to be on that land before the hospital was built. And so she even took it like a step further. Yeah.
What island was this in Hawaii? If you want to share, you don't have to.
So I interviewed moms from Kauai, Oahu, Maui, and the Big Island. So this particular mom was living and still lives on Oahu. So, and I was living there as well. So, she was talking about this hospital called Tripler, which is the military hospital. And so she was talking about, like, it's not just about having to go into Tripler. It's also the fact that it's a military hospital, and there's, you know, there's the militarization of the Hawaiian Islands can't be overstated, and the pollution that comes from that. But then also, you know, there are good people in the military too. So it's a very complex relationship. And then so that's the hospital. It's a military hospital, but it was also built on land that she was talking about. Like, it's not just about going in there. It's like, I recall what this land should be for us, like this actual location of where it was built.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like colonization stacked on top of colonization, stacked on top of colonization. And so the trauma is really layered. And so it wasn't just actually going into the hospital for these women. It was about, that hospital was built on, like Kapiolani Hospital is built on old taro fields that used to, I mean, taro is really spiritual in, I mean, that's the ancestor for the Hawaiians. So it's like plopped on top of the ancestors, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there's layers to this and complexities that I didn't see right away because I didn't grow up in Hawaii. Although I've spent a lot of time there and lived there and have really kind of immersed myself in some of the struggles and fights and beautiful people there as well. But so that was an interesting layer. A lot of the mommies that I interviewed had been doulas even before they had given birth as well. So they would tell me about their doula stories, like, okay, when I was in the hospital, I just saw one of my friends that I was supporting get an episiotomy out of nowhere, and she was screaming and nobody was listening to her. And how that was really traumatizing, not only for the mom, but for her witnessing this, you know, because we don't want to see that. We don't want to see, I mean, most of us, if we're not psycho, we don't want to see somebody's perineum getting sliced, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's really traumatizing, and against a mom's will is even more traumatizing. So a lot of these mamas had been already doing hospital doula work, and they were like, I can't do it anymore. I can't go in there. It was too much for me. And then they would choose to have a birth at home with the midwives. So Hawaii's midwives it's kind of interesting because they've, of course, throughout the 1800s, when the American kind of military and business apparatus came in and wiped out the monarchy, they also wiped out language and hula and prayer and chant and oli and plant medicine and tradition and healing modalities and birthing practices. So all this, you know, was kind of banned. And then kind of started to come back in the 1970s when the women's health movement in the United States started picking up. That was kind of the same time as this like Hawaiian language revitalization movement kind of popped up. And some of the Hawaiian language immersion schools now like got more popular since then. And more of the learning of the language and the perpetuation of the culture. But along that timeline, you know, people weren't really allowed to continue their cultural birthing practices, or had been lost because of the assimilation policies.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of Hawaiian midwives left. And there are some white midwives that have trained in Hawaiian birthing practices, and some Black midwives that have trained in Hawaiian birthing practices, but there's not a lot left. There's one who's like kind of leading the charge in Maui, and her name is Ki'i, and she's amazing and really helped out with all the fires in Lahaina, and she's just such a leader and such a strong woman. But you know, when we interviewed together, I mean, there's so much sadness there for the loss of Hawaiian midwifery.
Oh, absolutely.
And so that was a big layer for her. But my experiences with midwives and talking to them and having them support me, there's always that connection to land, and there's always that connection to place, and there's always that like magic kind of, I guess. I mean, Hawaii is already a magical place, but it's like there's that magic, like let's go out and look at the stars and pray, you know, while we're in labor. Let's do that so we can feel more connected, you know. So that's always built in, and such a beautiful part, I think, of the approach that the midwives in Hawaii take. That's not to say all of them take that approach, because there are, you know, there are midwives that are very by the book of the Meek accredited schools too. So
Yeah, there's always going to be
there's
that
that tension.
polarity.
Yeah.
The ones that are practicing traditionally, trying to uphold the indigenous practices that they can, like this one midwife that you're speaking to. And then there
Mhm.
are others that just come in and like, well, this is my job. I have my licensure. I just need to bing, bang, boom, get it done. And it takes away from the beauty of birth. It takes away from the
Mhm.
transformation, the power that women are meant to hold. And that's why indigenous midwives are so important, especially on Hawaii, as it's, I know that there are like just a few states left in America that still have quote unquote legal traditional midwifery, but like it's getting overrun, it's getting taken away from these midwives that are practicing in their true freedom for licensure, because it's something that can be controlled. It's a way to control
Yeah.
birth. It's a way to control women. And it's
Mhm.
really sad when you said that this midwife was speaking to how the practices of her indigenous culture have been forgotten and taken away. And it was really emotional for her. I can like
Yeah.
feel that. That's really sad to know that colonization ran so deep that it literally did in Hawaii, took away almost everything except for like 1% of their full culture.
Yeah.
And it's for the indigenous community that's still living on the islands there. I can just only imagine how heartbreaking that is. And I can like, on an ancestral level, I can feel that. Obviously, I'm not
Yeah.
Hawaiian, but as a Black woman, I can feel that level of trauma and sadness in a different
Yeah.
way for these women. And it is so important to save these women. And that's why I was so excited to speak to you, or not to save these women, but to save these women's stories. And that's why I was so
Yeah.
excited to speak with you, because the work that you're doing is to bring awareness to the fact that these indigenous Hawaiian midwives are literally having their livelihoods, their lives, their traditions, their cultures. The last few women that are doing this sacred work is getting taken away from them. And that's
Mhm.
not okay. That's really not okay, because it's
Yeah.
these women that understand that's the fostering of the next generations can only happen through the type of work that they do in the way that they're doing it, with
Mhm.
the connection to the
Mhm.
land, with the connection to prayer. Like you're saying, let's bring a mother outside in her birthing time. She might be feeling like she's having some difficulty. Let's pray to the stars, let's pray to the moon,
Mhm.
because that's where
Mhm.
she can connect to her child in an easier way, right? And
Mhm.
it's just so heartbreaking to hear that this
Mhm.
beautiful culture of Hawaii, which is such a magical place. I've never been there, but I would love to go
Mhm.
to honor it. It just feels like once the indigenous midwives, these indigenous keepers of birth, these indigenous keepers of the sacredness of their earth are fully gone, it's like, well, then what? What's going to happen to our worlds? So
Yeah.
it's like women like you doing this stuff to keep that fire, keep that flame still burning on that tiny,
Yeah.
the tiny fire that's still there for these women. It's really
Right.
important.
I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah. And it's such an honor to do that work. And I'm not the only person, obviously, that can
Mm,
share stories. I just happen to
mm,
be a pretty decent writer.
mm.
Luckily, that's one of the things God has blessed me with. So, if I can write it, then I might as well do it. I mean, of all the things I could write, this is probably the most important to me. And I think,
Mm,
like you're saying, kind of the most important thing for humanity, because if this leaves us, and I truly like am very hopeful person and know that, like,
mm,
even if it leaves for a generation, it's still in our cells and it's still in our DNA and in
mhm,
our children and our children's children. Like, it will
mhm.
eventually pop back up.
Yep.
It will come back no matter what. But it would be a lot easier if there wasn't such a struggle. And it seems like we have so much to struggle against to keep that,
Yeah.
like, you had mentioned your move, and I can only imagine just the things that you had to shift around just to, be closer to the lifestyle that you want to live. And it takes a lot of front end work to do that. And I think people don't realize that. Like,
Mhm.
they're just like, oh, those are just like crunchy hippie people that live close to the land, or they're just like very traditionalists, and they don't want to advance with technology or anything like that. It's not about that. It's
Yeah.
about living life according to like what's mapped out in our DNA.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's going to be there, and it's going to keep pestering us. And I think that's why we have such massive rates of mental health issues and massive rates of violence and massive rates of like even financial issues in the world. It's like if we were just
Mm-hmm.
to calm down a little bit, we
Yeah,
could find some sustainability, you know?
totally.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's so true. And it's obviously we're talking about Hawaii and these midwives and the work you're doing because that was where you focus, but it goes for all of the indigenous peoples all over the world, not just in Hawaii, not just in North America, but everywhere. Like these practices, like you're saying, yes, they live in our bodies, and there are people that are waking up to it, feeling that pull, feeling that soul pull, whatever it may be, to change their lifestyle to really get connected back to who they are. And there is that struggle because you have that like back and forth of, maybe your family's not with it, or there's always like fear and like, what if it doesn't work out, what if this happens, blah blah blah. But it really is like, it will always work out if you trust in spirit, if you trust in God, if you trust in that we are all part of the universe and we're all just meant to be in our joy and our love and thriving and happiness. And yeah, it's like we need these beautiful traditions to carry on through us. So if they all do get demolished within the next 100 years, like you're saying, our children's children will still have that vibration through their body because they're carrying
mhm,
it in the blood that I have. Your kids are carrying your blood in their
mhm.
body, and that gets passed down. And then it will just like, life will always want to come through. Mother
Yeah.
Nature always finds a way to survive. Our souls will always find a way to come into
Mhm,
this whatever physical reality it is that we're living. So
mhm.
yeah.
I think something that's just crazy is, and maybe it's because of Hollywood and all the stuff they put out in the political theater, it's
Mm.
like easier to imagine the annihilation of humanity than to imagine us living authentically
Oh,
as
totally.
people of the earth, you know?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, absolutely.
what crazy idea that has just been implanted in everybody's head.
Yeah.
And that's that fear of, then okay, what if? And
Mm-hmm.
it, well, what if it doesn't work out? Okay, what if? So
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna work out. You're still gonna breathe, you're still gonna eat, you're still gonna need to clean your body and take care of your babies, and
Mm-hmm.
that's all part of life. And if for some reason it doesn't work out wherever we find ourselves, then we find ourselves in new places and we survive in
Mm-hmm.
new places. Like
Yeah.
it it's it's just that fear paradigm, right? And
Yeah.
it's in our heads. Even if we are free birthers or home birthers or whatever, it's like there's always the question of what if. And I think that's kind of a natural instinct because that's our
Mm-hmm.
survival, you
Yeah,
know?
totally.
We just
Yeah.
have to surrender a little more to like trusting a little more. And I think birthing in this way gives us an opportunity to trust and to gain some power, so that
Mm-hmm.
that what if question doesn't overpower what
Mm-hmm.
we truly need to be, like how to live authentically for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, that blueprint that we have within ourselves, we can have the what if questions, but we can always turn inwards and trust that our innate design, our innate blueprint will always lead us and show us the way of where we are meant to be and how we're supposed to be living. And
Mhm.
yeah, what is best for us, so that the what if is like, what if? Okay, that's a question, but it's like you said, not going to overpower me, which is so true. Okay, so I did have a question that I wanted to ask you, circling back to these indigenous midwives in Hawaii. Did they talk about their practices that they are trying to hold and upkeep surrounding birth?
Mhm.
Can you
Yeah,
share a little bit about, yeah, like you did mention, like
certainly.
taking the woman outside to pray under the moon and the stars, and I think that's just so beautiful. But was there more things that they were really, using nature and how they supported birth in this really beautiful way?
Yes, and I thank you for that question because this is such an important part of place-based like spirituality and place-based culture. And so a couple of the Hawaiian moms who I interviewed, they needed to go into like, some of them needed to go into actually like the land, like away from concrete, away from the city area, and be like, not, I don't want to say like go into the jungle, right? But it's like literally going into the land, into relationship with land. So there was one mommy, she she actually birthed, I think this was in the 90s when they were building one of the highways, and one of the H3 highway is built on a very spiritual land. And she was going to this place where the highway was being built and taking care of the land and communicating with the land. And it was just whispering back to her, like, to come birth there. And so she she kept visiting this place to birth, and the state officials found out about this, and like the sheriff set up a blockade to block her from birthing there.
Seriously.
And she isn't this crazy? Like these are the lengths that people will go to stop somebody from doing something that's for the most human thing ever. And I guess there was like, she called her midwife, and they got in the car, and they're like, okay, we're gonna go here, and we're gonna birth. And there was a dump truck or like a trash truck in front of them, and so the sheriff had to open the gate to let the dump truck go through, and they're like, okay, floor it before he closes it. So they floor it through, and then the sheriff was like, oh, whatever, I'm not chasing this lady down again. Anyway, so she birthed there, drove up the road, they climbed through the forest, and she had her baby there.
Wow.
Which is really, really kind of cool. And then one of my friends actually that I met at the university, she moved back to her her hometown in Maui, and she birthed on her Aina Kapuna. And Ki'i, of course, birthed on her Aina Kapuna as well. And Aina Kapuna just is basically translates loosely to the land of my elders, or the land of my ancestors. So literally where their family lineage is traced back to.
Wow.
So they're like, I need to go there, rather than any other place in Hawaii or in town, and go there and birth to feel connected to my ancestors, and to feel them, and to have them surround me. And so, and oftentimes these were places that were really, had to go to places that are really rural. And so far away from hospital, far away from city lights, connecting with the land, connecting with the soil, connecting with the stars, and just turning off all of the outside distractions so that they can connect, because the world can be so loud. And that's one of the challenges, I think, to getting connected back, to the spaces we need to be in to birth. You have to turn off everything. So I just thought that was such a cool thing, and so meaningful for them, and really gave them a source of strength. And so some moms chose, like, after that, like, I'm not gonna get a US birth certificate for my child. We'll get a Hawaiian, ID, and we'll get our passport that way. But we're not gonna go through the system, or we're not gonna get a social security card, and let the child, again, with that idea of consent, which is a big buzzword, right? Let my child have the consent, whether or not they want to be part of the American system, kind of thing. So
totally.
I thought that was kind of cool. And again, I was like, how can you do that? Really? I didn't know, but you can do it. You can do it.
Wow. And then are there specific traditions that these indigenous Hawaiian midwives uphold when it comes to the placenta? Because I've heard of many, and I've read books on different cultures around the world. So did you hear about this or see their placenta traditions?
Well, I heard about it, some of them. So oftentimes the placenta will be buried by a tree, and then that will be like kind of the tree for the child. And then the umbilical cord this is what I've heard, again, need to confirm, but the umbilical cord, if you bury it, it means you'll always return to that place. So oftentimes people will bury the umbilical cord, you know, at the place that's closest to their family lineage there, so that they always return home. So I think that's kind of interesting, especially with Hawaii getting so expensive and people having to leave their home. That 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 umbilical cord, literally, to the Hawaiian Islands is still there. And then there are some things like that I read about. There's a really cool researcher. Her name is Pua, and her full name is in the book. And I cite her quite a bit. And she went through a bunch of archives on birth practices, on Hawaiian birth practices, and she's a home birth mommy too. And I remember reading some of the stuff she wrote about, like, you shouldn't have anything tangled when you're pregnant because it could like tangle up your umbilical cord. So there's these everyday practices now. So sometimes I'm like, I can't have my computer cords tangled because it'll tangle up my day, kind of thing. I'll just like little superstitions, but I think they make a difference. And you know, if you want to be around a particular friend a lot, usually it means that that baby is going to have a special connection with that friend.
Wow.
There's just really cool things, and what to eat. Like there's a whole dietary regimen of what to eat and what not to eat.
Do you want to speak to that briefly? Because I am pretty sure I know like what that dietary what that diet would look like, but do you just want to kind of speak to that ancestral indigenous way of feeding and nourishing pregnant mothers?
Yeah, a lot of it is like, a lot of it is just traditionally would just be eating, you know, things from the water and from the land. But now it's a little difficult because lifestyles and such. So it's essentially avoiding anything processed as much as possible. I know there's a certain group of foods or certain fish that you're not allowed to eat. And then I believe you're not allowed to eat coconut, if I'm correct. Again, I could be wrong. I'm just trying to remember from the research on what Pua did. And then afterwards, after birth, a real focus on super nourishing foods and warm foods in particular, like soups and stews and things that are not going to make the mom cold. And keeping the mom's feet warm. And of course, like what we should be doing when we're bleeding, like we should be keeping our feet warm, keeping our wombs warm. And the same goes for after birth. Like mom is not supposed to just get up and do a bajillion things. She's supposed to eat a lot of nourishing soups and stews, and not really a whole lot of hard food either. After birth, and then just staying really, really warm. So that's really important. I think there are protocols, and again, you would have to ask a Hawaiian cultural practitioner, but I think there are protocols on what you would eat if you're further up in the mountains versus closer to the ocean, because the different climates and the exposure to the elements and things like that. So that might be different per woman. And then each family in the Ohana system, each family has different sets of birthing practices. So it's not just Hawaiians have one set of birthing practices. It's like each family has different practices and ideas that are passed down through the family lineage. So diverse, like such a diverse birthing experience and options, because it's not just, again, a monolith, right? Like again, that's what the dominant culture does. It just, anything that is not dominant is put into a monolithic category that's not nuanced at all. And it's so much more complex than that.
Wow. Okay. Oh, cool. That's so neat. I'm really happy you touched on some of those postpartum practices as well, because it's so important. And I'm not surprised that they would, you know, tend to the mother, give her nourishing food, keep her warm, keep her wrapped up and in bed with baby. Because that's just all cross-culturally around the world. Like there is just these very standard practices that all cultures knew how to respect and tend to women that were in their postpartum timing. And this new age of postpartum women and mothers don't have even the tiniest fraction of the care that they deserve and the care that they need for their healing, for the care that they need for their restoration, the care that they need to be exalted in their after their birth experiences, which is really heartbreaking.
It is. May I offer one other piece that I did remember, which I was like, this is so cool. So in the family systems, sometimes it was like a male member of the family that was supporting the birthing woman. So I thought that was really interesting too, because we have these gendered ideas around who's supporting moms.
Yeah.
And like
supporting her throughout her birth process.
Yeah. Yep.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. And helping, to usher the new baby into the world. So it's interesting because I think like we always think of like, oh, okay, this is women's work, but it's in their family systems, it wasn't always a woman. Sometimes it was the man supporting. Right. And not even like a partner necessarily. It could be like the father or an uncle or whoever was kind of the mid-man of the family to help. So I thought that was really cool because I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's different from what I grew up in. And then my husband, he didn't have, birth was like men are not there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's an effect of colonization or if that's just his culture, but he's kind of the first guy in his family probably to be like right there watching the baby come out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like that is kind of, cultural, depending on whatever specific cultures it is, bringing in the men, but it's the men that are honored men. Like you're saying, it's the uncle or the partner or the this man, but it's like an honored man who is possibly the pillar of that household alongside the matriarch, that person that can really hold that protection energy, and that man that can really hold that energy for that woman to be able to go where she needs to go. And I do feel that, colonization did take that away from our men, from our fathers, from men that could be in the birth space and witness this beautiful transformation. Because I do believe that men should, I don't want to say should, but that men are meant to experience their partners or women in their life at some point moving through this beautiful birth transformation. But through all of the terrible things, colonization, the rise of the church, the taking away the power of women, and then this whole like weird patriarchal lineage of men, and not having secure solid men, that it took that away from them. And I think that's really sad that many men don't see their babies be born into society, and the norm is like, oh yeah, he's down at the pub having a drink and we'll call him once the baby's here. It's so disconnected, such a big disconnection. And then you kind of like, it makes me wonder, okay, well then if that father was not even around when that baby was born and didn't have that opportunity to connect, and now the mother has all this birth trauma to work through, then he's coming in not feeling connected to this child. It's like, well, no wonder why these families have high divorce rates 1 year, 2 years after that child has been born, because they weren't able to fully mesh as a family. They weren't able to create that family constellation because they've been told like, men aren't supposed to be there, you can't experience this. And then your wife, your partner is getting violated and feels like, well, where were you to protect me? Why didn't you, and it's just like, the men are meant to see this. Men are meant to see women in their power, and they're meant to see their children be born into the world, or like experience it in some sort of way, so that they can also have that energy of, well, I need to protect this generation of life, because this is the being I have brought forth onto this planet, and now I need to protect this child so that they have the best opportunity to become the fullest being that they are meant to be. So anyways, that's just like a whole other like come through for men in the birth space. I think it's important, especially now, to bring healing for that whole family unit and family system. And it's needed. Men should be a part of it, because they helped get the baby into the womb, so like they should be able to see this baby come from that womb as well.
And it's half of them, right? Like it's all about, I mean, if we're talking about sovereignty, I don't think you can separate it from connection, right? Like you have to have connection to have sovereignty. You can't live in a vacuum, you can't live in a bubble. And you have to work for these things with your people, with your community, with your family. Like if a dad is connected from that experience of his baby's first breaths, it's really violent to do to a father. I mean, and there's situations where there's violence and domestic violence, and I get why not all men are in the birthing space, but for us not to invite them in that way has been really sad. And it's been kind of a relic of the medical genesis in this country. It's like, of course they're going to take men out of the room because then they can do whatever they want to the woman. Her protector is not there. And taking the sovereignty from the woman is so much easier if the man's not around.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. Yeah,
it's
when
one less
she's
hoop to jump through.
yeah, if she's in a vulnerable state and feeling scared and being told if she doesn't do this, her baby's gonna die. If she doesn't do this, she's gonna get cut open and they're gonna pull.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's so much easier to just get her to comply. But like, and it's that, yes, it's that, and it's so much deeper than that too, because it's not just the 600 years of colonization and patriarchy. It goes like thousands of years, 10,000s of years further back from that. But that's why here and now in this present moment, like having the men, having the fathers come in, getting them back in these spaces, having these women feel exalted, like everything that we're doing with the home birth movement, the free birth movement, the women taking their power back is all just changing all of these narratives that have been so ingrained in our ancestry for these tens of thousands of years. And it's beautiful, right? It's really beautiful. And it does start with keeping these practices of indigenous midwifery, keeping these practices of traditional midwifery, keeping these practices of what it means to be a midwife that cares for the earth and cares for women, because we are one and the same. Mother Earth is a woman. Woman is Mother Earth. We are the physical embodiment of Mother Earth. And it's so important to have women that support other women and witness other women in these big transformational experiences, not just with birth, but with their bleeding, with moving into perimenopause, and having that for us, so that we have that reassurance, we have that love, we know that we are connected to other women and that we are divinely connected to all that there is, which is Mother Earth and all of connected consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. Like that, the connection piece is like can't be overstated enough, because that's what these systems do. They disconnect. They can really easily disconnect you from yourself and your abilities. You know, just starting from like wheeling a woman into the labor room. Like, why is she in a wheelchair? Her legs work. Like, she's disconnected from her ability from the jump. And it's like the midwives are reconnecting themselves with things, and it's always going to come back. They're reconnecting themselves with the birth power. But I will say in Hawaii, it's been a struggle because they're trying to take that away at the legislative level. They have, but you know, there's some midwives that are like, fuck your policies, I don't care. You know, like they're like, we're gonna do what we're gonna do. But some of them are like, you know what, I can't risk the $2,000 fine every time I do a birth. Or risking jail time, you know. So like I respect that too. It's a hard balance to strike. And then there are midwives who want to help women, but I think they've been trained in a way that is like, so like the scientific method is fine for some things, but it will never capture all of the spirituality of that connection with Mother Earth and that connection as women, and that birth power and that feminine power. Like the scientific method will never do it justice. It just can't. Like it's a different method altogether. So it's something I really struggled with writing this, because I was like, I have to use the scientific method. You know, hypothesis, your research question, your analyses, your themes, blah blah
Mm,
blah. And I'm just like, this can't capture anything.
yeah.
It's not going to capture. This not going to do it justice. And so some midwives work in that scientific realm,
Mm,
and new mommies who are maybe contemplating having a free birth or a home birth with a midwife, I would encourage them to ask their midwife what their spiritual approach is before
mm,
entering into that birth realm
yes.
with them. Because with my daughter, I
Yes.
had a couple midwives there who were very clinical, um and her birth was beautiful because it needed to be, but there was disruption.
Mm,
And that, and I could see, that disruption also caused me to have a postpartum hemorrhage. Like, I can see how
mm,
that all played out.
yeah.
I can
Mm-hmm.
see that playing out.
Mm-hmm.
Not that that was their fault, but the disruption caused me to take a lot of time
Mm-hmm.
to birth her, and my uterus got tired. With my midwife, with my son in Hawaii, she is a spiritual midwife, and it's just was like so easy.
Mm-hmm.
I, the energy, and I'm not saying all births are going to be perfect with spiritual midwives, but ask, like,
Ask
mommies
that
out there, please
question.
ask that question, because it's going to make a difference in some way, shape, or form to how
Totally.
you view your birth experience and to the energy that is brought in. Like,
Mm-hmm.
my daughter wouldn't come out until there was a shift change with the midwives at the birth center,
Yep.
because she couldn't come out in that energy with that other midwife. She
Mm-hmm.
couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a huge difference if your energy is not vibing. So please make sure
Totally.
it's good.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so true. Like, yeah, it's the physical aspect of birth, but it's also that energetic, spiritual aspect. And I've heard of and witnessed birth where that energetic aspect, there's something off, there's somebody there, something's happening in that energetic sphere,
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
birth just goes awry because, yeah, you really have to make sure that there's that clean energy, supportive,
Mhm.
trusting, loving energy there.
Mhm.
So I'm not surprised with the shift change once that new woman came in that was like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm here for you. And
Yep.
then your baby can feel it and felt safe to
Mhm.
finally emerge into the world because whomever it
Mhm.
was that was there was putting off this funky
Mhm. Mhm.
space that she just did not want to come through. And it's, some
Yeah.
people might think that that's not true, but it's like that is more true than anything else, than a baby getting stuck in the, pelvis, or a baby,
Right.
these pathologies that get put on women and babies
Mhm.
all the time in birth. It's like, well, have you checked the energy? Like, what's
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
what's actually happening in this space?
Right.
Who is
Yeah.
here in this
Yeah.
space that is causing something that we
Mhm.
can't physically see or physically touch, but it's here and it's messing this up,
Yeah.
and this child is wanting to come but is also like, mm-mm, not doing it, not coming now.
Right.
And mom can feel it too and is like holding
Yeah.
back. It's like, I don't want my baby to be born in this.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, you've got to understand that birth is more than physical. It's
Yeah.
energetic and it's deeply spiritual.
Yep. Yep. And I think all the moms I interviewed and the midwives, they understood that. And even some of the midwives who are amazing, stellar, just spiritual people, they know that too, that like sometimes they have to step out of a room and let the mom be in her own energy. And that's the mark of
Mm-hmm.
a good midwife, because she may be better hands off than hands on
Mm-hmm.
because of that energetic exchange. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean she doesn't have to be there or anything like that, but these things are these things I feel like we all innately have. We just haven't maybe found or recaptured the language, or the
Mm.
maybe the world is a little too loud still for us as a collective of all women, right,
Mm-hmm.
to reclaim this quite yet, but we can feel it.
Yeah, totally.
And if we can keep following those intuitive nudges, I think that'll bring us back to a place where we're like, oh yeah, these pieces of wisdom coming, right? Because it's in ourselves. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I remember, I have this remembrance of things, even if it
Mm-hmm.
didn't happen to me. I have a remembrance of how this should go.
Yeah.
I know how this plays out now in order to honor myself and others. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And trusting that something, a remembrance can come through, and we don't need to justify it, because everyone nowadays is so like, where are your facts? Like, I need to fact check this. Like, what
Yeah.
article did you get that from? What website? It's like, no,
Yeah.
it came through me and I know it's truth. And that's the only thing that matters.
Yep.
It came through
Yeah.
me and I know it's truth. And that's it, you know?
Not to get too political, but I will. That's exactly how I felt with the COVID stuff. And I was like, there's no science out here confirming whether this, whatever. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, just
Yeah.
intuitively, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just not
Yeah.
gonna do it. Intuitively, I don't feel it. The energy's off. It's way off.
Yeah. I had the same
And
thing.
I'm
Yeah.
just like, yeah. And it's like, oh, it's crazy. Then
Mm-hmm.
the state response to that is just crazy. Well,
Mm-hmm.
then we're gonna take away your livelihood. And
Exactly. Yeah.
you're
We get
gonna take,
punished. Like,
you know?
we try to use
Yeah.
our intuition, we try to use the power that we have within us, women and men, and then you get punished for it. The
You
system
do
will
get
punish you
punished.
for trying to be a free being. So it's,
Yeah, it
it's
will.
like you feel like you're in a
Yeah.
rock and a hard place, but sometimes you just got to break out and be like,
Yeah.
screw it, F all this.
Yeah.
I'm just living with my internal truth because
Yeah.
it's right. And that's all I need. I don't
Yeah.
have to justify
Yeah.
anything. I just know I'm right.
Exactly. And then the funny part is 5 years later, the science comes out proving you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, this has been such a beautiful conversation. But before we wrap up, I would really love for you to share a little bit about your book, like the title, talk about it,
Sure.
and yeah, just get that energy of that in this space as well, please.
Sure. Well, first of all, I would love to send you a copy, so maybe we can connect to make that
Ah,
happen.
yes, I'd love
I'll do
that.
a little
Thank
signed
you.
copy. But here's the cover. It's by a
Beautiful.
digital birth artist. She's on Instagram. I think her handle is Spirity Soul. Anyway, I bought the rights to this because I was like, I love this picture, and it encapsulates. For the people who are listening, it's basically a mommy squatting down, and her womb is an orb that looks like Earth, and she's on a planet, and the green really looks like Hawaii, and she has a
Mm.
lepo'o, which is a head lay. So I
Oh,
was just like, this just
wow.
encapsulates everything. But the book is called Back to the Womb, Reclaiming Birth Sovereignty. And I guess the overall premise is um, that our womb is so full of knowledge and can lead us into this world from a place
Mm.
of truth and spirituality and intuition. And we don't have to doubt those things, even though we can struggle to doubt them. We don't need to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it details my birth story with my children, and my husband and his support that he provided, and really the history of medicalization in America and
Mm.
medicalization of childbirth in America. And then I dive into the home birth story, or the stories of home birth moms and their lifestyles and their worldviews,
Mm.
to like, again, decompose all of those weird stigmas that society has about home birth
Mm-hmm.
moms.
Mm-hmm.
And I have mommies in here that have free birth too. I have a
Yeah.
couple of them in there. And actually there's two mommies in there that we talk about their free births. You guys probably, listeners, are probably familiar with Piper Lovemore, and she was in the Orgasmic Birth film, and she is a midwife and a free
Mm.
birther in Hawaii.
Okay.
So yeah, and then the last chapter or two talks about our gut wisdom and
Mm.
that connection with like the vaginal microbiome that gets sent down to our babies when we birth, and how
Mm-hmm.
important that is, like, for our immunity, but also that gives us actual gut wisdom. Like, that's our
Yeah.
intuition from our grandmothers.
Yeah.
So we trace some spirituality, sprinkles of spirituality in there,
Yay.
kind of as a big fu to the academia. But I won't tell my dissertation committee that. And then yeah, and then just, reflection on how important it is to carry this birth energy forward. I don't even know, it's more than birth. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's like our life force forward, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So I hope you guys enjoy it. It's not a perfect book, but I put blood, sweat, and tears into this, and the moms who, I share their stories, they
Mm-hmm.
put their blood, sweat, and tears into this through their own experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
it was really, really an amazing way to capture their stories.
Wow. Oh, that book just sounds amazing. I'm so grateful that you shared it. I'm so grateful that you took the time to write it and that you've done all of this work that you're doing for these women, these indigenous midwives. And like I said earlier, like speaking their truth and allowing their truth to be heard in the spaces where it needs to be heard, because we can't lose this knowledge. Yes, it could come back if it was fully lost, but why does it have to go? Right? That's the question. It doesn't need to leave. We just need to continue allowing it to grow for ourselves, for our families, for our children, for their children, for humanity. So yeah, you're doing beautiful sacred heart work for the Feminine Collective, and I'm so grateful that we got to spend this time together.
Me too. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and your amazing questions and all the work that you do. And you just, I can tell that you're such a heart-centered, genuine person, and I'm grateful to spend time with you, and your energy is just so beautiful. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much, Alexandra.
Thank you so much, women, for listening to this latest episode of the Free Birthing in Color movement. If you want to continue supporting this movement and all that comes with it, please give a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Like the videos on YouTube and share this episode with some of your friends. As reciprocity for the work that I'm doing and the content that I'm creating, it only takes 2 minutes to show your support through a 5-star rating, a small written review, and a share. If you want to give a monetary donation to help with the back-end costs of keeping everything that is happening within this movement going, you can send your donations through PayPal via the link in the show notes. And again, as reciprocity for the work that I'm doing and creating, I'm so grateful when those donations come through. I have many other avenues of work that I've created, such as Portals of Wisdom, which are educational guidebooks for women to reclaim and remember their personal bodily sovereignty. I have one-to-one activation sessions and one-to-one or group mentorship opportunities, as well as an amazing course called Cyclical Woman that is a deep dive into the natural cycles of Mother Earth and connecting into your internal rhythms in relation to where Mother Earth is at any given moment. And lastly, I want to mention again the Free Birthing in Color community. It is open for enrollment, so please, if you want to create a deeper sense of connection to myself and other women navigating the same phase of life that you're in, please, please, please come and join us, and let's create something truly beautiful in there. All information can be found within the show notes below, or you can go to primalwomanportal.com and you'll find everything that you need. I'll see you in the next episode.